What if I told you that the desperation you feel when someone walks away is not love, but an ancient wound crying out for attention? In the next few minutes, you will discover why trying to control in order not to be abandoned is exactly what guarantees loneliness, and how healing that wound through compassion can completely transform the quality of your connections. If you stay with me for 3 minutes, you'll understand why Carl Jung said that our most stormy relationships are perfect mirrors of our unhealed parts. The wound of abandonment does not begin when someone leaves. It begins much earlier, in those childhood moments where you learned that your worth depended on how useful, obedient, or perfect you could be in order to keep the important people from disappearing from your life. The child you once were developed a survival strategy, controlling every possible variable to make sure love didn't slip through your fingers. But what once worked for survival is now destroying you. Every time you obsessively check your phone, waiting for a reply, every time you over-explain to avoid a misunderstanding, every time you betray your own boundaries to keep the peace, you're operating from that wound. You are not loving. You are begging for safety. And the cruel paradox is that the more you try to control, to avoid abandonment, the more you suffocate the spontaneity and freedom that allow love to bloom. Jung observed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. When it bothers you that your partner needs space, when you panic because a friend doesn't answer right away, when you interpret every silence as rejection, it's not about the other, it's your shadow speaking, the part of you that never learned to be at peace with itself. Think about the last time you felt that sting of panic when someone took too long to respond. Your mind created 10 catastrophic scenarios. They're angry, they're losing interest, they're with someone else. But notice what you didn't consider, that maybe they were simply busy living their own life. Your wound doesn't allow you to see neutral realities, only threats. Here's an exercise that will change your perspective. The next time you feel that anxiety of abandonment, instead of reacting right away, do this. Step 1, breathe deeply and recognize my wound has been triggered. Step 2, ask yourself what that wounded child inside needed to hear. Step 3, give it to yourself. Repeat, I am safe, I am valuable, I deserve love, I don't have to beg. Step 4, from that inner calm, decide if you truly need to act, or if you can simply hold the space. Step 5, act from wholeness, not from lack. Feel the energetic difference between reacting from the wound and responding from integrity. That difference decides whether your relationships are built on quicksand or solid rock. Compassion toward your wound doesn't mean justifying destructive behavior. It means understanding that behind every desperate attempt to control is an inner child who once learned it wasn't safe to trust. Jung knew that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires integrating these wounded aspects of ourselves with radical compassion. When you can look at your abandonment wound not as something that defines you, but as a part of your story that needs healing, everything changes. You stop being a victim of automatic reactions and become the conscious healer of your own psyche. And from that place of inner strength, your relationships transform, because you're no longer asking to be saved, you're sharing from your wholeness. But here comes the deepest challenge. The abandonment wound is not healed by finding someone who never leaves. It heals by developing such inner solidity that you can love without clinging, give without emptying yourself, commit without losing who you are. Jung called this individuation, becoming a complete individual who can choose intimacy from freedom, not from need. If this resonates with you, and you feel something stirring inside, subscribe, because in the next videos, we'll go deeper into building that inner solidity that transforms not only your relationships, but your connection with yourself. The second revelation you must understand is that your abandonment wound feeds on a toxic fantasy. The idea that there is someone out there whose love will complete you so perfectly that you'll never again feel that existential anxiety. It's the fantasy of the rescuer, the perfect soulmate, the relationship that finally fills the void you've carried all your life. But Jung saw it differently. Your partner, your friends, your family did not come into this world to heal your wound. They came to be mirrors, to trigger exactly what you need to see in yourself in order to grow. When you project onto another the responsibility to make you feel safe, you turn them into a hostage of your healing process. And hostages always look for a way out. Projection is one of the most powerful and destructive mechanisms of the psyche. When you cannot tolerate aspects of yourself, you project them onto others and then chase or reject them there. If you cannot tolerate your own capacity for abandonment, you become hypervigilant to any sign that the other might leave. If you cannot accept your own need for space, you interpret the other's need for space as rejection. Jung warned that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Your wound, when it operates unconsciously, creates exactly the situations you fear the most. You become so hungry for reassurance that you overwhelm, so afraid of loss that you cling, so desperate for control that you suffocate the freedom love needs to breathe. Imagine this. Someone close to you says they need a night for themselves. Your wound immediately interprets this as they don't love me enough. They're losing interest. They're probably with someone else. From that wounded interpretation, you react with interrogation, emotional drama, or subtle manipulation. But what if you could hear that request from a different place? Here's the exercise that will revolutionize your way of relating. When you feel your wound triggered by another's need for space, do this. Step 1. Pause before reacting and connect with your breath. Step 2. Recognize quietly, my wound is triggered, but this is not about me. Step 3. Ask yourself what this person needs to feel whole. Step 4. From your heart, not your wound, respond with generosity. Repeat, I trust this love. I trust this person. I trust myself. Step 5. Use that time apart to nourish your own wholeness. Notice how this response creates connection instead of distance. When you answer with trust instead of fear, you give the other freedom to choose you consciously, not to stay out of guilt or pressure. And the beautiful paradox is that when you stop desperately chasing security in relationships, when you can hold uncertainty with grace, when you love from wholeness instead of lack, you become magnetic in a completely different way. People feel safe to be authentic with you because they don't have to take care of your wound while managing their own life. Jung understood that the deepest relationships don't arise when two wounded people cling to each other, but when two individuals in the process of individuation consciously choose to create something together. Not from need, but from abundance. Not from fear of abandonment, but from the celebration of mutual choice. Yet healing the wound of abandonment requires doing something your nervous system interprets as dangerous. Learning to be alone with yourself without collapsing into anxiety. You must develop the ability to stand in uncertainty, to find fullness in your own company, to trust your capacity to be okay no matter what others do. And that leads us to the next insight. The third truth that will transform your understanding is that the abandonment wound does not heal by filling the void with people, activities, or distractions. It heals by learning to inhabit that void with compassionate presence until you discover it was never a void to be filled, but a sacred space to be honored. Jung knew that at the heart of every neurosis is the flight from suffering, but he also knew that at the heart of healing is the ability to stay present with what hurts. When you feel that sting of abandonment, your automatic impulse is to seek immediate relief. Send another message, call someone, scroll endlessly, drown in work, anything not to feel that raw loneliness. But every time you run from that sensation, you reinforce the belief that it's intolerable, that you really do need someone else to be okay. The most liberating truth you can discover is that you can feel the sting of abandonment and still be whole. You can experience the anxiety of separation and still remain intact. You can touch that primal loneliness and discover that on the other side of resistance, there is a sacred solitude that doesn't need to be rescued. Jung observed that loneliness does not come from not having people around, but from the inability to communicate the things that matter to you. But there's an even deeper layer to this truth. The loneliness that hurts the most is not the lack of someone to share your thoughts with, but the disconnection from your own essence, the abandonment of the most important relationship of all, the one you have with yourself. The wound of abandonment is, at its core, the result of abandoning yourself to keep the love and approval of others. Every time you betrayed your truth to avoid conflict, every time you gave up your boundaries to maintain peace, every time you made yourself small so others would feel comfortable, you abandoned yourself. And now, you project this pattern of self-abandonment into your relationships, fearing others will do to you what you have been doing to yourself for years. Here's the most powerful exercise to heal this dynamic. When you feel your wound triggered, instead of seeking external relief, do this. Step 1. Sit in silence and locate the sensation in your body without judgment. Step 2. Breathe into that sensation and say, I see you. I accept you. You don't have to protect me anymore. Step 3. Ask that wounded part what it needs to hear from you. Step 4. From your wise adult self, give it the words of love and safety it's been waiting for all its life. Repeat, I will never abandon you. I will always be here for you. You are worthy of unconditional love. Step 5. Stay present with that part until you feel a softening, a relaxation in your nervous system. Feel how this returns your power. Instead of depending on others to regulate your nervous system, you develop the ability to be your own safe refuge. This doesn't mean you don't need relationships or that you should become an emotional island. It means that when you relate from fullness instead of lack, when you can offer yourself the security you've been looking for in others, your connections become conscious choices instead of desperate dependencies. Individuation, according to Jung, is not about becoming independent of others, but about developing such inner solidity that you can choose interdependence from strength, not from need. You can commit deeply because you are not asking the relationship to save you. You are offering your wholeness in service of something greater. When you can hold your own wound of abandonment with radical compassion, something miraculous happens. You stop triggering that wound in others. Your inner peace becomes a field of healing that allows the people around you to relax their defenses and show up more authentically. If you've made it this far and feel something moving deeply within, comment individuation so the algorithm knows this content is serving you and can show you more tools for your inner healing. Jung understood that behind every wound there is a gift waiting to be discovered. The wound of abandonment, when healed consciously, transforms into an extraordinary capacity for compassion, empathy, and authentic connection. Those who have navigated their own pain of abandonment with awareness become safe spaces where others can deposit their vulnerability without fear. But this transformation requires that you stop seeing your wound as something that defines you and begin to see it as something that teaches you. The fourth revelation that will change your relationship with abandonment is to understand that your wound is not your identity, but your wisest teacher. All this time, you have been fighting against it, trying to suppress it, control it, or escape from it. But Jung had a radically different perspective. What you resist persists. What you accept transforms. Your wound of abandonment contains vital information about what your soul is asking for. It is not there to torture you. It is there to guide you toward a fuller and more authentic version of yourself. Every time it is activated, it shows you where you still need to develop inner strength, where you are still giving away your power, where you need to set clearer boundaries or deepen your relationship with yourself. The wound of abandonment is like an inner alarm system that goes off when it detects relational patterns that replicate dynamics from your unresolved past. But instead of seeing that alarm as something wrong with you, you can begin to see it as your inner guide saying, "Pay attention, you are operating from old programming. It's time to choose a more conscious response." Carl Jung observed that we do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Your wound of abandonment is part of your personal shadow. Those aspects of yourself you have rejected or denied because you perceive them as unacceptable. But when you illuminate that shadow with compassionate awareness, you discover that it holds not only pain, but also wisdom, strength, and abilities you didn't know you had. The one who has lived the terror of abandonment develops an extraordinary sensitivity to perceive the emotional needs of others. The one who has had to create safety from insecurity develops a resilient capacity to navigate uncertainty. The one who has touched the deepest loneliness develops a genuine appreciation for authentic connection. But to access these gifts, you must stop fighting with your wound and start dialoguing with it. This requires a fundamental shift in your relationship with your own pain, from enemy to ally, from something to be eliminated to something to be integrated. The first step, when you feel the wound activate, instead of resisting it, welcome it. Say, "Hello, wound. I see you. What are you here to teach me today?" The second step, listen without judgment to what arises. Maybe fear of not being enough. Maybe anger for feeling invisible. Maybe sadness over lost loves. The third step, ask your wound what gift it is trying to give you through this experience. The fourth step, look for the hidden wisdom. Maybe greater discernment in relationships. Maybe clearer boundaries. Maybe deeper compassion. Repeat, my wound is my teacher. My pain is my portal. My vulnerability is my strength. The fifth step, act from that integrated wisdom, not from automatic reaction. Do you feel the difference between resisting your wound and collaborating with it? When you work with your wound instead of against it, it becomes fuel for your evolution. Jung understood that the process of individuation does not consist in eliminating our wounds, but in developing a conscious relationship with them, where they serve our growth instead of sabotaging it. The wound of abandonment, when integrated, becomes an inner compass that guides you toward more authentic relationships and away from dynamics that do not honor your worth. When you can hold your wound of abandonment without collapsing into it, you develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold the tension between opposites without taking sides. You can love deeply and also hold the possibility of loss. You can commit fully and also honor your need for autonomy. You can be vulnerable and also maintain your dignity. This ability to hold paradoxes is what allows you to create mature relationships where two whole people choose to build something together, not where two incomplete people cling to each other, hoping to find wholeness. The wound of abandonment, when healed, teaches you that you can survive loss, thrive in solitude, and choose love from abundance. But there is an even deeper dimension to this transformation. When you integrate your wound of abandonment consciously, you not only heal your relationship with others, but you heal your relationship with life itself. You develop the ability to trust the process of existence, to embrace uncertainty as a space of possibility, to see losses as redirections towards something more aligned with your truth. Your wound of abandonment has been your harshest teacher, but it can also become your most powerful ally if you learn to listen to its wisdom instead of running from its pain. The fifth and most liberating realization is that healing the wound of abandonment does not mean guaranteeing that you will never again experience loss, rejection, or loneliness. It means developing such depth of connection with yourself that you can navigate these inevitable human experiences from integrity, not from despair. Jung knew that the goal of individuation is not to eliminate suffering, but to transform our relationship with it. The fear of abandonment keeps you in a constant struggle against the impermanence of life. You try to control uncontrollable variables, create guarantees in an uncertain universe, secure permanence in a world where everything is in constant change. But this struggle exhausts you and paradoxically distances you from the presence that would make every moment of connection deeper and more meaningful. When you can accept that loss is an integral part of the human experience, something radical happens. You stop wasting the present by worrying about the future. You stop contaminating current love with anxieties about its possible end. You allow yourself to experience the fullness of every encounter without the shadow of fear, darkening the beauty of what is happening now. Jung wrote, "Life truly lived is a constant confrontation with the soul." Your wound of abandonment has been confronting you with aspects of your soul that need to be seen, honored, and integrated. The fear of being alone confronts you with the need to develop an intimate relationship with yourself. The fear of rejection confronts you with the need to accept yourself unconditionally. The fear of loss confronts you with the precious temporal nature of all bonds. Healing does not come when you eliminate these fears, but when you develop the capacity to hold them without letting them direct your life. You can feel the fear of abandonment and still act from love. You can recognize insecurity and still maintain your boundaries. You can touch loneliness and still celebrate your wholeness. This is the difference between being controlled by your wound and having a conscious relationship with it. When you are being controlled, every relational decision is contaminated by fear. You avoid necessary conflicts to not risk the connection. You give up important boundaries to keep peace. You explain yourself obsessively to avoid misunderstandings. You sacrifice your authenticity at the altar of relational safety. But when you have a conscious relationship with your wound, you can feel the fear and still choose authenticity. You can recognize the impulse to control and still choose trust. You can touch the anxiety of abandonment and still choose vulnerability. When you face a situation that activates your wound of abandonment, do this. First step, breathe deeply and say, "My wound is activated, and that's okay." Second step, connect with your body and locate where you feel the activation. Third step, ask yourself, if I acted from my integrity instead of my wound, what would I do? Fourth step, visualize yourself acting from that integrity and notice how it feels in your body. Repeat, I can feel fear and still choose love. I can touch insecurity and still hold my truth. I can experience loneliness and still celebrate my wholeness. Fifth step, act from that vision, not from automatic reaction. Feel the power of choosing your response instead of being a victim of your automatic reactions. This is the freedom Jung called individuation, the ability to respond to life from your conscious center instead of from your unconscious patterns. When you heal the wound of abandonment, you do not become invulnerable to relational pain. You become resilient to it. You do not eliminate the possibility of loss, but you develop the capacity to find meaning and growth in every experience, including losses. You do not guarantee that everyone will stay, but you ensure that no matter what happens, you never abandon yourself. True security does not come from controlling the behavior of others, but from trusting your ability to navigate whatever life brings. True stability does not come from relationships that never change, but from a connection with yourself that remains constant through all changes. True fullness does not come from finding someone who fills your emptiness, but from discovering that you were never empty, only disconnected from your own inner abundance. Jung understood that the deepest purpose of our wounds is to guide us back home, to ourselves. Your wound of abandonment has been a harsh but wise compass, pointing you toward the need to develop an unbreakable relationship with yourself. When that relationship is solid, all other relationships become expressions of abundance, rather than desperate attempts to fill lack. The healing of the wound of abandonment is a return to the deepest home, the recognition that you have never truly been alone because you have always had the companionship of your own soul. And from that intimate companionship with yourself, you can choose to connect with others from mutual celebration rather than mutual need. In the end, you discover that what you thought was your greatest vulnerability, your capacity to be wounded by abandonment, was in fact your greatest gift, a profound sensitivity that, when integrated consciously, allows you to create bonds of extraordinary depth, because only those who have touched the deepest loneliness can truly appreciate the miracle of authentic connection. Your wound of abandonment has taught you about the value of presence, about the precious temporal nature of every encounter, about the importance of showing your truth while you can, about the courage it takes to love without guarantees. These are not wounds that need to be eliminated, but wisdom that needs to be integrated. When you can hold your wound of abandonment with radical compassion, you become a safe space where others can place their own vulnerability. When you can love without clinging, you inspire others to do the same. When you can be alone without collapsing, you give others permission to also find their own inner strength. The healing of the wound of abandonment is not a destination you arrive at, but a practice you cultivate. Every time you choose trust over control, every time you respond from integrity instead of fear, every time you remain present with your pain without seeking immediate relief, you are not only healing your own wound, but also contributing to the collective healing of this ancestral wound carried by so many. If you have come this far, you are no longer the same person who began this journey with me. Something within you has shifted, something has softened, something has been illuminated in the depths of your being. The wound of abandonment that once hid in silence, as your secret jailer has begun to reveal itself, not as a source of endless suffering, but as a conscious guide that points you toward more authentic relationships and a more fulfilling way of living. Where once there was fear, now there is awareness. Where once there was a sense of being trapped, now there is the possibility of freedom. This transformation is subtle, yet profound, like the quiet movement of roots beneath the earth that slowly but inevitably makes space for a new tree to rise toward the light. What you are experiencing is not simply healing in the conventional sense, but a profound reorganization of your inner world. Abandonment has long been a shadow for many, a silent wound carried through the years, shaping choices, desires, and even the way love is given and received. Yet when you dare to face it, when you allow yourself to see it not as a curse, but as a teacher, something extraordinary begins to happen. That pain that once seemed unbearable becomes the very material from which your inner strength is forged. You start to realize that your ability to connect deeply with others, your capacity for empathy, and your hunger for authenticity were born precisely from that wound. It is as if the very thing that tried to break you is the same thing that now grants you access to a deeper understanding of yourself. And in that understanding, you begin to relate differently not only to those around you, but also to your own inner being. You no longer run from your vulnerability. Instead, you begin to honor it, to listen to it, to let it speak. Vulnerability becomes your compass, your path toward truth, guiding you away from shallow masks and into genuine connections where your essence is finally seen and felt. This is why the process you are living through matters so deeply. It is not just about overcoming a personal struggle. It is about transmuting the very energy of your pain into a force of creation. Each time you choose to face your shadow instead of hiding from it, you are reclaiming fragments of yourself that had been lost. Each time you integrate what once terrified you, you expand your sense of wholeness. And every step you take in this direction is not only a gift to your own growth, but also a gift to those who cross paths with you, because your presence becomes healing. Your words carry weight, and your energy begins to reflect authenticity rather than fear. So I invite you to reflect on how this process is transforming the way you relate, first to yourself, in the way you treat your own emotions, your body, your soul, and then to others, in the way you listen, in the way you love, in the way you set boundaries, and allow intimacy to unfold. Notice how the old patterns of needing approval or fearing rejection are slowly giving way to something more real, more grounded, more free. You are learning that your worth was never dependent on being abandoned or accepted by someone else. It was always within you, waiting to be remembered. And as you continue walking this path, remember that the journey of individuation, as Carl Jung called it, is only just beginning. The integration of your shadow is not a single moment, but an unfolding process, a lifelong exploration of all that you are. Every week, every day, every breath becomes an opportunity to embody more of your truth, to embrace the parts of yourself that were once denied, and to allow that integration to ripple outward into the world around you. This is why I encourage you to stay connected, to keep exploring the depths of the human psyche, and to keep discovering how the wounds that once defined you can be transformed into the greatest sources of your strength. Subscribe, stay present, and open yourself to receiving more practical tools of healing grounded in Jung's wisdom, because this is not the end of your journey. It is only the beginning. The steps you take from here will not only shape your own path, but will also touch the lives of those who are fortunate enough to encounter you. Your healing is not just personal, it is collective. Each moment of integration within you becomes a light that others can recognize and draw strength from. And in that way, your path becomes not only a personal transformation, but also a silent act of service to the world. Hatred doesn't always scream. It doesn't always break things or shout insults across a room. It doesn't always come with dramatic exits or loud confrontations. Sometimes it arrives in silence, disguised behind a polite smile, a friendly tone, or a gentle touch. Sometimes hatred lives quietly in the eyes of someone you thought you could trust. It might be a friend, a family member, or someone you share your everyday life with. They don't lash out. They don't make it obvious. Instead, they stay close, but not sincerely. What you see on the surface seems like affection, but your intuition keeps whispering that something is off. It's not what they say. It's how you feel in their presence. It's as if their energy slowly drains yours. You walk away from the conversation, feeling smaller, weaker, slightly off balance, even though they were kind. You try to shake the feeling, but it lingers. Carl Jung's deep psychological insights remind us that the shadow doesn't only dwell in what we refuse to see in ourselves, it also lives in what others refuse to confront in themselves, especially when they unconsciously project it onto you. Many people walk around wounded, unaware of the shadow they carry, and when someone shines light, your light, they feel threatened. Not because you did something wrong, but because your growth exposes what they haven't faced in themselves. That's when silent hatred is born, not out of your actions, but from what your presence symbolizes to them. They won't admit it, they won't express it, but if you pay close attention, you'll feel it. One of the first signs is this: they compliment you with words, but contradict themselves through their actions. They'll be there when you achieve something, but their energy won't match their words. They say, "I'm happy for you," but their eyes look away. They clap, but there's no real excitement in it. They speak kindly, but their tone is flat. Their words carry subtle doubts, quiet comparisons, or soft little buts that undermine your achievement. This isn't just momentary jealousy. It's not the passing envy we all feel sometimes. No, this is deeper. It's persistent. It's a quiet, calculated energy of minimization dressed up as affection. They don't confront you or start arguments. They chip away at your confidence in subtle, insidious ways. You might hear, "I'm so proud of you," followed by a pause or a lukewarm expression that leaves you feeling off. It's as if your success reminds them of everything they've left undone, and instead of being inspired by your progress, they feel diminished by it. They might say they admire you, but they never lift you higher. They hold you back gently, almost lovingly. They remind you not to get ahead of yourself. Don't get too excited, they say. Everyone has their moment. At first, it seems like wisdom, but over time, you find yourself sharing less and less. You stop telling them about your joys, your breakthroughs, your quiet victories. Why? Because every time you do, something goes cold, something disconnects. They don't block your light directly. They try to dim it from the shadows. That's the most painful sign. when someone pretends to celebrate your light while secretly trying to extinguish it. Over time, their responses become predictable, polite, but empty. They say the right things, but nothing feels real. Their eyes lack warmth. Their smile is rehearsed. You feel like you're speaking into a void where joy should echo back, but doesn't. Instead of rejoicing with you, they seem to be managing themselves around you, masking something they don't want you to see. So you stop. You pull back. You hesitate before sharing your happiness. And that's the tragedy, because you once trusted this person. You once believed they were safe. But now, every conversation feels heavy, like something unseen is always hovering between you. They never say anything hurtful outright. But what hurts is the absence of genuine support, of emotional presence, of authentic connection. They might change the subject suddenly, or offer praise with a twist. That's great, but I knew someone who did it faster. Or they point out some irrelevant flaw. That's cool, but let's see if you can keep it up. These small remarks add up. Each one, on its own, might seem harmless, but together they form a pattern of emotional erosion that wears down your self-worth in invisible ways. The hardest part? This person may have once truly supported you. At one point, their presence may have uplifted you. But now, something inside them has shifted. Your growth threatens something unhealed within them. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your progress casts a light on the parts of themselves they still avoid. And instead of using that light to awaken, they recoil. They shrink from it. And because they can't admit that, not even to themselves, they stay close. But not to help, to hold you back, quietly. It doesn't show up in fights. It doesn't show up in dramatic scenes. It lives in long silences, in the absence of joy, in mechanical replies that carry no soul. And you, having learned to trust your intuition, can no longer ignore it. You feel it. You know that something's no longer aligned, that their affection, once warm and free, now feels conditional, muted, fake. That's when you realize something essential. Real love doesn't compete. It doesn't compare. It doesn't calculate. Real affection celebrates with you simply because it's happy for you, not because it needs to keep score. Real closeness lifts you without dragging itself down. And when someone close to you can't do that, when your light causes discomfort they try to hide under polite words, it's time to listen. Not just to what they say, but to what you feel, because energy never lies. And even when truth is buried under layers of pleasantries, it always speaks to the soul. Sign 2. They only seek you out when they need something, but vanish when you need them. There's a pattern that repeats with quiet precision. That person reaches out, calls, gets close, but almost always with a hidden agenda. It's not genuine affection. It's usefulness. They need something from you, even if they don't say it outright. And when you're doing well, when your energy is high, when you're able to give, they're suddenly available, attentive, and present. But the moment you go through a low, when you need just a bit of support, they disappear. They change the subject. They ignore your pain. They don't know how to stay unless there's something to take. This type of relationship appears normal on the surface. It may even seem like there's love, but if you look closely, you'll notice the lack of reciprocity. When you share something difficult, they shift the attention back to themselves or offer phrases that sound comforting, but are actually emotional distance disguised as, "Well, we all have bad days," or "Cheer up, it'll pass." There's no true presence, no space for your vulnerability, only selective interest. The shadow in this kind of bond reveals itself in how you're reduced to what you can give. Your feelings don't matter, your usefulness does, and that, even if unspoken, is felt deep in the skin. Because there's no listening, no holding, no real intimacy, only need, only conditional presence. At first, you might excuse it, say they're busy, they have their own problems, or they don't want to bother you. And maybe that's partly true. But over time, you begin to see the pattern. They always have energy to show up when they need something, and never when you simply need to be. You start to notice a kind of calculation behind every approach, as if their affection had a price tag, as if their presence only activated when there was something to gain. It's a strange feeling, to be near someone who says they value you, but doesn't know how to be with you when you're not shining. They only see you as useful when you can support, when you can fix, when you can listen. But if you fall, if you break, if you're unavailable, suddenly they don't know what to do with you. They grow uncomfortable. They pull away. They minimize your pain. And that's not love, not friendship, not real connection. That's dependency disguised as closeness. That's use, not care. And you, with your big heart, you've allowed it more than once. You've been there when you had nothing left to give. You've replied to messages on days when you couldn't even reply to yourself. You've kept conversations going when your body begged for rest. But something in you stayed because you thought that's what love meant. But that giving never came back. Not when you truly needed it. And not because they forgot, but because in that relationship, the flow only moves in one direction. Over time, you begin to feel drained. A quiet sadness settles in. Because deep down, you know your presence is being measured, not cherished. You realize that when you need comfort, that person doesn't vanish by accident. They vanish because they don't know what to do with your humanity. They only knew how to deal with your energy when you were fixing something for them, when you were a source of relief, when you nourished them, but not when you needed to be nourished. And that is one of the most silent forms of hidden hatred. When someone close feels entitled to take everything good you offer, but never sees that you're human too, that you fall too, that you feel too. Deep down, there's a projected shadow. They get uncomfortable seeing you vulnerable because it confronts everything they don't want to see in themselves. It bothers them that you're not always light, because they only knew how to extract brightness from you, not accompany you in the dark. That constant imbalance is not love. It's a bond built on emptiness. And when you finally recognize it, when you stop justifying their absence, when you clearly see that you're not a well they can drink from endlessly without ever giving anything in return, you realize that this too is a sign, not obvious, not spoken, but deeply real. Someone who only needs you when you shine doesn't love you. They consume you. And that energy, even if it comes from someone close, is a disguised form of rejection. A veiled way of saying, I only want you when I don't truly need you. That kind of bond leaves you with a growing sense of emptiness, not because of what you receive, but because of what doesn't happen when you stop giving. Eventually, you begin to expect the disappointment. You know that if something breaks in your life, if you experience loss, a fall, a dark moment, you can't count on that person. Not because they lack time, but because they're emotionally unavailable. Their presence depends on your usefulness, not your existence. And that, even if unsaid, hurts. It hurts deeply, because your heart remembers every time you were there for them. It remembers your effort, your availability, your care. And when faced with repeated absence, something in you begins to close. You no longer trust the same way. You don't open the same way. Because through pain, you've learned that in that space, you can't be your whole self, that you're only allowed to show your functional, strong, radiant side. But your fragility has no place. Your silence makes them uncomfortable. Your sadness is ignored. The energy in this type of relationship is asymmetrical. You give from the soul, but what you receive is a simulation of affection, a conditional presence. And the more conscious you become, the more you notice. Because what begins to hurt more is not what happens, but what doesn't happen. You begin to feel the emotional void more than the lack of words. And that's a clear sign. The soul knows when it's alone, even when the body is accompanied. And so, you begin to ask new questions, not out of anger, but out of clarity. How many times have you been there for someone who never was there for you? How many times have you confused loyalty with exhaustion? How many times have you kept a relationship alive because of shared history, even though the present leaves you empty? Not out of guilt, but out of habit. Not out of love, but out of fear of accepting that this bond never truly held you. Recognizing that isn't betrayal. It's a return to yourself. It's no longer justifying the intermittent presence of someone who only appears when they need something, but never when you're falling. Because that, too, is a form of hidden hate. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that doesn't see you. The kind that refuses to deal with your full humanity. And you, who have learned to see without fear, now know this isn't what you deserve. That love isn't giving without limits. That companionship isn't about emptying yourself for someone who doesn't know how to hold you. And when someone close shows affection only when you're useful, what they're truly showing is that your presence doesn't matter for who you are, but for what you represent to them. That truth, even when it hurts, sets you free. Because real love doesn't only show up when it's convenient. Real love stays even when it can't give. Even when you can't give. It stays simply because the soul feels it. And if that presence disappears when you fall, then what you had was never love. It was ego dressed up as closeness, shadow wrapped in courtesy. And finally, your soul has learned to see the difference. Sign 3. They make fun of you jokingly, but always aim where it hurts. There's a very specific kind of disguised aggression that only someone who knows you well can pull off. The kind that hides behind humor. That close person drops light comments, supposedly harmless, but they always manage to hit a sensitive nerve. They laugh at your struggles, downplay what matters to you, mock your changes, your decisions, your most personal transformations. And when you notice it, when something inside you shrinks, there's always a way out waiting. It was just a joke. But your body doesn't feel it that way, because it's not what is said, it's where it comes from. And that kind of mockery doesn't come from intimacy. It comes from resentment. It's not meant to connect. It's meant to cut. It's not there to laugh with you. It's crafted to make you feel like you shouldn't take yourself too seriously, that you shouldn't believe in yourself so much, that even your most valuable steps are still laughable. At first, you don't see it clearly. You even laugh with them because the comment comes wrapped in familiarity, in that tone that makes everything feel like part of a harmless game. But something inside you doesn't laugh. A subtler part, more sensitive, shrinks. And it's not that you lack a sense of humor. It's that you know every joke has a weight, an intent, an edge. And the person throwing it knows exactly where to cut. These aren't spontaneous jokes. These are words that show up right when you're opening up, talking about your goals, your fears, your growth. And instead of support, you get irony, as if your progress were exaggerated, as if your emotions were a performance, as if your wounds weren't valid enough to deserve respect. You start to realize it when you try to talk about it, and the response is defensive. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. You're blowing things out of proportion. But you know it's not an isolated thing. It's a pattern, a way of communicating that hides contempt under a laugh, that throws darts disguised as affection, but always aiming to belittle you. And you, who have learned to tune into your energy, feel it. There's something dishonest behind that tone. What makes it more complex is that it comes from someone close, someone who, by being so near, has access to your cracks. And that's what makes it more painful, because what seems like a harmless joke is actually a reminder that your vulnerability is not safe there, that your most intimate parts are being used as ammunition to mask what they're too afraid to say out loud. Often, this kind of hostility isn't even recognized as such, not even by the one expressing it. It's a projection of their shadow, repressed envy, unmanaged insecurity, resentment that can't be openly expressed because it would break the bond. So it slips in as sarcasm, as double-edged laughter. And you, who no longer deny what you feel, begin to fall silent. You no longer share with the same freedom. You no longer open up with the same innocence, because you've realized that this closeness isn't a refuge. It's a minefield. The relationship becomes a space where you must measure your words, protect your excitement, soften your joy, because any step forward might become the next punchline. Not because you've done something wrong, but because your light exposes the unacknowledged darkness of the other. Instead of being inspired, they defend themselves, and that defense takes the form of ridicule, a laugh that isn't laughter, but a mechanism. This signal is one of the hardest to accept, because the doubt always lingers. Maybe I am exaggerating, but when every encounter leaves behind a strange echo, when every joke leaves a scratch, when every smile feels heavier than it should, then you're not misreading it. You're in a connection that's starting to wound you in disguise. And that, no matter how much it's dressed up as closeness, is a form of emotional rejection. Carl Jung knew this. Everything we refuse to recognize in ourselves, we project onto others. And someone who hasn't embraced their shadow often tries to dim the light of someone who has begun to. When that dynamic hides behind humor, it becomes even more insidious. But you feel it, and feeling it is the first step to protecting yourself. Because your truth is not a punchline. Your process is not a joke. Your sensitivity is not too much. It's your compass, and it's clearly showing you where you're no longer safe, even if it still looks like you are. With time, you stop laughing just to be polite. Not because you've lost your joy, but because you're no longer willing to participate in your own diminishing. You start noticing that behind every "just kidding," there's a deeper message. Don't be fully yourself. Don't shine so brightly. Don't show what you feel so openly. And you realize that's not humor. It's control. Control disguised as closeness, meant to keep you small so they don't feel uncomfortable. The person making these comments might even seem affectionate. They might do you favors, be there at times, and that's what's most confusing. Because this isn't a declared enemy. It's a hidden wound, a projected shadow, and it only shows itself when you let your guard down, when you share something real from your soul. Then, instead of an embrace, you get a smirk. Instead of validation, you get sarcasm. And there's no place lonelier than opening up to someone who will use your truth as entertainment. That's when you understand not every connection deserves access to your intimacy. Some people simply aren't ready to honor your growth, your sensitivity, your depth, because deep down, they haven't allowed themselves to feel that within themselves. And so when you do, they mock it, not out of conscious malice, but because they don't know how else to respond. Because your journey becomes too clear a mirror of what they're not ready to see. Real affection never laughs at what hurts you. It never belittles your changes. It never turns your inner path into a sarcastic story. Mature love is careful, even in the way it jokes, because it knows that humor can be a bridge or a wound. And someone who truly knows you, who truly stands with you, doesn't cross that line again and again, using the excuse of, "That's just how I am." When you stop smiling out of obligation, when you begin creating emotional distance without needing to explain yourself, when you start withdrawing your trust without a scene, just because your body no longer feels safe, that's when you're choosing your truth over old habits. And that, too, is an act of love, not toward them, but toward yourself, because your process deserves respect. Your journey needs no defense. And if someone close uses their proximity to hurt you through humor, then that's not closeness, it's a disguise. And your soul, already trained to see what goes unspoken, knows it. So it begins to walk away, not with rage, but with dignity, because there is nothing more sacred than protecting your truth in the place where it most deserves to be honored. Sign 5. You feel a deep sense of relief when that person isn't around. It's not something easy to explain, but your body knows it before your mind does. When they're absent, when they don't text, miss a meeting, or simply aren't near, you breathe differently. It's as if the air becomes lighter, as if energy flows freely again, as if your inner state returns to center without resistance. That relief isn't shallow. It's a quiet signal that your emotional system was on high alert near that person. Even if you didn't consciously know it, you spent a long time trying to justify it. You told yourself it was stress, that you were too sensitive, that you needed to get along better. But your body doesn't lie. Every time that presence disappears, something inside you softens. Sometimes, without noticing, you start smiling, speaking more freely, moving more naturally. And it's no coincidence. It's your soul recognizing that it's no longer under surveillance. Because some people don't need to tell you they're judging you. They do it with silence, with looks, with the way they tense up when you talk about your achievements or share something emotional. And you feel it. You've always felt it. But since there was no concrete evidence, you denied it, until the day the contrast becomes too obvious to ignore. You feel better when they're not around, more like yourself, freer, more at peace. And that's when everything becomes clear. You don't need arguments, yelling, or drama. Sometimes the deepest discomfort reveals itself in the invisible, in the constant unease you feel around someone, even when everything seems fine on the surface. And when that happens, your soul doesn't need more explanations. It just needs permission to walk away. That permission comes from you, not from resentment, but from clarity. Because real love doesn't weigh you down, doesn't suffocate, doesn't feel like emotional surveillance. Real love gives space. And if someone close to you, instead of giving you space to be, fills you with unease every time they come near, then what they offer isn't love. It's a form of control disguised as connection. Listening to that relief, recognizing it, and acting accordingly is one of the greatest acts of spiritual maturity you can experience, because it's choosing not to force yourself into places where your energy doesn't flow. It's trusting how you feel, even if you can't fully explain it. It's choosing your peace over loyalty to what hurts in silence. Because your soul no longer wants to survive relationships. It wants to live them in truth. And when you finally give voice to that relief you used to ignore, something deep begins to shift within you. You start looking back with new eyes. You remember moments that once seemed insignificant, now clear as emotional warnings you couldn't decode at the time. That time, your excitement faded right after sharing something with that person. That day, their silence wasn't neutral. It felt like punishment. That conversation, where for no reason you could name, you felt lonelier with them than when you're alone. All of it returns, not to make you suffer, but to help you understand. Understand that some forms of affection don't heal. They just uphold an image. That some bonds don't accept you. They only tolerate what doesn't disturb them. And you, with your sensitivity, you felt it all, but also learned to adapt, to stay quiet so as not to upset anyone, to pretend for the sake of peace. Until now. Now you know that real emotional well-being isn't built on denial. It's built on vibrational honesty, on the ability to truly feel how you are when you're with someone. Beyond labels and family ties, beyond what others expect from you. When someone close secretly resents you, you won't always see it in their actions, but you'll feel it. In that subtle anxiety you can't explain, in the constant urge to justify yourself, in how hard it is to be spontaneous. And that quiet discomfort, repeated over time, slowly drains you without you noticing. Until one day, you walk away, and everything becomes clear. That kind of clarity doesn't come from the mind. It comes from the soul. And once it arrives, it can't be ignored. This isn't about hating the other person or seeking emotional justice. It's about choosing yourself, even if that disappoints those who never truly knew how to love you. Because your light wasn't born to beg for approval. It was born to shine where it can be seen without fear. And once you recognize that, everything begins to realign. And that's when you realize your intuition was never broken. You were just taught to mistrust it. Because living with someone who hides their rejection behind a mask of affection forces you to constantly question yourself, to think you're the problem, that you're overreacting, imagining things, being unfair. But you weren't. What you felt was real. What you perceived was true. You had just gotten used to living with an emotional distortion so subtle it hurt without leaving a trace. The shadow, as Carl Jung would say, doesn't always show up as obvious evil. Sometimes it hides in disguised envy, in support with conditions, in a presence that feels more like monitoring than companionship. And out of loyalty, out of habit, out of love, you learned to call that a relationship. But deep down, you always knew something wasn't right. Now, you no longer need external proof. You no longer need the other person to admit their hatred or change their behavior, because what's changed is how you feel about yourself. You've broken the cycle of self-justification that kept you close to someone who hurt you. You understand now that the soul doesn't protect itself with excuses. It protects itself with boundaries. And even if the grief is silent, even if the distance hurts more when it involves someone close, there's something even more painful: continuing to deny what can no longer be hidden. Because love doesn't mean allowing everything, and your light is something you can no longer dim. It's pulling you further and further away from everything that once made you doubt it. That's the true beginning of your healing. The courage to face what hurts without covering it up. The decision to prioritize your well-being, even if the other person doesn't understand. The certainty that your energy deserves to grow in peace, not in a silent war. Because when someone secretly hates you, what they fear most is that you'll stop doubting yourself. And that moment has now come. Thank you for reading this far. If even a small part of what you just heard resonated with you, don't ignore it. That subtle inner voice that recognized the truth in these words is no coincidence. It's part of your own light trying to speak to you, gently reminding you that you are ready to see things differently. In a world that constantly teaches us to repress our emotions, to numb our pain, to pretend we're okay when we're not, daring to feel, to listen, and to be honest with ourselves is nothing short of an act of courage. And more than that, it's an act of self-love. When something stirs inside you, even if it's just a whisper, it's because a part of you already knows the way. You are not broken, you are not lost, you are awakening. And awakening isn't always pretty or easy. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's confusing, but it's real, it's raw, and it's yours. If this message came to you just when you needed it most, take it as a sign, not from me, but from your own soul. A sign that you are not alone, that there is a place where you are seen, where your depth is not excessive, where your emotions are not something that can be fixed, but something that can be understood. That place lives within you, but also here, in this space we are creating together. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. This channel is not about noise, it's about presence. Each video is carefully crafted for souls like yours, souls brave enough to look within, ask the hard questions, break old patterns, and soften to their truth. Here, you will always find words that comfort, truths that awaken, and insights that heal. Not because they come from outside, but because they remind you of what you already carried within. This is not just a message, it's an invitation to come home, to yourself. And if you're still listening, perhaps you're ready to remember who you are, ready to live with more intention, more honesty, and more connection. Thank you for being here. You are not alone. Being alone is never the real problem. What truly hurts is feeling lonely while in your own company. Because genuine loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of your own presence. Carl Jung perceived this during his own inner exile, when, amid life's noise, the only constant companion he had was his own mind. And within that stillness, he discovered the answer. Loneliness is not a sentence, it is a mirror. Yet why do so many collapse inwardly the moment they are alone? Why does silence summon the darkest thoughts, the coldest emptiness, the heaviest anxieties? Perhaps it is not solitude that wounds, but the disconnection from the essence of one's own life. Because it has never been about having someone beside you. It has always been about being whole. You might receive endless messages, fill your days with plans, be surrounded by faces, and still feel hollow. Or you might spend an entire week without uttering a word to anyone, and yet remain in perfect peace. The real problem is not solitude itself, but the inner noise we carry when we do not know how to inhabit it. Jung observed that the soul withdraws, not to abandon the world, but to return with clarity. And you, where do you go when everything falls silent. Most flee that moment. They turn on music, scroll endlessly, call someone, do anything to avoid simply being with themselves, because they fear themselves, because they have never met themselves, because they cannot exist without constant stimulation. And therein lies the trap. The more you run from silence, the more enslaved you become to what is outside you. You seek constant approval, instant attention, forced company, all to escape the very emotions you should be quietly observing. Jung never longed to flee from the world. He sought instead to enter it with composure, not reactivity. And composure is born only in silence, in the discipline of sitting with yourself without screens, without masks, without pretexts. Yet no one teaches us this. We are conditioned to perform, to distract ourselves, to appear always accessible. We are told that being alone is sadness, that you need someone else, that without another, you are incomplete. And so we beg for attention instead of cultivating presence. To learn to be alone is not to isolate yourself. It is to encounter yourself. It is to discover within a place of safety, a space that does not collapse when others leave, a ground that does not rely on applause, messages, or promises. Because when you know how to be alone, you stop begging for company. You no longer settle for empty relationships. You no longer cling to those who bring you nothing. You no longer avoid silence for fear of hearing your truth. And in that moment, when you finally befriend yourself, the miracle happens. You are no longer alone. You are with yourself, which is, in essence, the most real and most forgotten bond of all. Jung understood that the most powerful person is not the one who controls crowds, but the one who can remain alone and not destroy themselves in the process. Perhaps this is why you do not advance, do not connect, do not heal. Because every time you are with yourself, you look for the nearest exit. But that escape does not save you. It only delays the inevitable meeting with your most honest reflection. You were not born knowing how to inhabit yourself. You were taught to meet expectations, to look outward, to seek approval. But very rarely were you taught to look inward, to sit with yourself without judgment or haste. That is why, when real solitude comes, you do not know what to do with it. You do not know how to hold that silence, how to observe your mind without wanting to shut it down, how to stay with yourself without needing to distract or numb. Jung understood that an undisciplined mind is a man's greatest enemy, that suffering comes not so much from what happens outside, but from what we allow to happen inside without awareness or guidance. And if you cannot be alone, you become addicted to others, not out of love, but out of need. And when you are with them, instead of sharing yourself, you use them to avoid facing yourself. You do not seek connection, you seek distraction. That is why many relationships fail, not because of the lack of love, but because they are built from emptiness. Two people who cannot be with themselves expect the other to give them what they have never cultivated within. That is not love. It is emotional dependence. And when that dependence breaks, you not only lose someone, you lose your center because you had placed it outside. That is when the densest loneliness appears, the one that feels like a loss of identity. Jung's philosophy offers a powerful idea that a wise person is never truly alone because they carry their own universe within. And that universe is not made of noise or promises, but of conviction, values, and presence. Learning to be alone is returning to yourself. It is asking, without fear, what you really need, what you have been avoiding, what inner voices you have silenced for fear of what they might reveal. And when you dare to listen, at first they hurt. They are critical, judgmental, fearful, insecure. But little by little, if you do not run, something else emerges. A calmer, wiser, firmer voice. The one that has always been there, waiting to be heard. That voice is you. Not your ego, not your masks, not your wounds. You, without adornments, without filters. And when you finally reconnect with that voice, solitude begins to transform. It is no longer punishment, it becomes companionship. Because the real problem was never loneliness. It was the emptiness of meaning. It was the disconnection from your purpose, your emotions, your essence. That is where the real work begins. Not in forcing yourself to feel fine, not in pretending it doesn't affect you, but in building a relationship with yourself so solid that your emotional state no longer depends on others. Jung wrote that within each of us lies an impregnable fortress, a citadel that cannot be destroyed by anything external. But you only find it when you stop seeking outside what can only be built inside. And yes, there will be days when the silence feels uncomfortable, moments when you want to escape. But if you stay a little longer, if you breathe and remain, you will discover that the peace you seek is not in someone else, but in you. That is the difference between being alone and feeling alone. One is a fact, the other an interpretation. There is a freedom that only solitude can give, a freedom that does not feel like euphoria, but like calm. It is not a shout, it is a deep sigh that comes when you stop trying to fit in. Jung found that freedom in the midst of life's battles, betrayals, and decisions that shaped destinies. But his true battle was never against external enemies. It was against his impulses, his disordered thoughts, his emotions without direction. And if he, with all his knowledge, understood that the only real mastery was mastery of the self, why do you still believe that being alone means being incomplete? Society bombards you with images of couples, shared success, ideal friendships, but no one speaks of the value of intimacy with yourself, of that silent hour when you understand things no one could ever explain. When you learn to be alone without feeling lonely, it's not that you no longer need anyone, it's that you no longer define yourself through anyone. And that completely changes how you relate. You stop demanding, begging, manipulating. You start sharing from abundance, from a space within you that is full, not to fill voids, but to expand, to enjoy, to be without depending. And that emotional maturity only arrives when you cross the discomfort of solitude, when instead of avoiding it, you make it your ally, your teacher, your mirror. Because in solitude, you can see how much noise you carry, how much of what you do is for the need to be seen, loved, or accepted, and how much is the genuine expression of your essence. In that space appears a vital question. If no one were watching, would you still do the same? If no one applauded you, would you still walk that path? If you were completely alone, would you be happy with who you are? The answers hurt, but they free you, because they show you to what extent you have been betraying yourself, postponing your authenticity out of fear of judgment, abandonment, or discomfort. And once you see it clearly, you can no longer go back. You can no longer keep running from yourself, because you have understood that the only constant in this life is you. And if you do not cultivate that relationship, no other can last for long. Jung wrote that the soul grows stronger in the solitude of its own company, like a fire that shines brighter in the dark. And you are no exception. You can be that fire too. You can also shine from within. But you must stop constantly seeking outside. You must give yourself that space, not once a week, not only when you feel overwhelmed, but every day, even if only for a few minutes, even if at first it feels uncomfortable. Because every time you choose to remain with yourself, even briefly, you are repairing something inside. You are remembering who you are, without influence, without pressure, without noise, and little by little, what once seemed unbearable becomes familiar, and over time, it becomes your refuge. The noise of the world is constant, and many use it as anesthesia. They fill themselves with voices, plans, movements, just to avoid stopping. Because in the pause appears the question they fear the most. Did I truly choose the life I am living right now? That question, simple yet unsettling, carries the weight of every decision, every compromise, and every path you have taken. Being alone, truly alone, gives you the perfect stage to ask questions like this, the kind you usually avoid in the noise of daily life. Solitude removes the distractions, the excuses, the comfortable lies. It places you face to face with yourself, unmasked and unadorned. And it is there, in that raw and unfiltered encounter, that the true work of reconstruction begins. Many people fear that mirror. They fear what it might reveal. The truth that for years, maybe decades, they have been living not for themselves, but for the approval of others. They have been bending, adjusting, shrinking, performing, simply to fit in, to be liked, to survive. But if you can stay long enough in front of that mirror without turning away, something extraordinary happens. The same mirror that once accused you begins to offer you a possibility. You can still choose differently. Conscious solitude is not a sentence, not a curse handed down by fate. It is an open space, a fertile ground where you can plant something new. It is where you strip away the borrowed roles you've been wearing and meet the unaltered truth of who you are. In that silence, you are free to rebuild, not from habit or fear, but from a place that is authentically yours. Carl Jung understood this not only as a psychological theory, but as a lived necessity. He often withdrew from the world, even when influence and attention were within his reach. He knew that the mastery worth having begins within. If a person cannot govern themselves, cannot master their own impulses, fears, and desires, then they have no right to try to govern anything or anyone else. The discipline he cultivated was not a cold detachment. It was a warmth, a clarity, and a peace, born from no longer being a slave to mental chaos. That inner stillness allowed him to act with purpose, fairness, and humanity. When you learn to truly inhabit yourself, you no longer depend on the world's applause. You stop performing. You stop chasing validation. Your presence steadies, your mind clears, your decisions become deliberate and fully your own. People notice, even if they cannot explain why. The one who does not fear solitude is untouchable, because they cannot be bought with companionship, seduced into self-betrayal for attention, or manipulated by the fear of being abandoned. They carry within them something unshakable, something no one else can give or take away, and from that independence, relationships transform. You connect not out of desperation, but from the joy of sharing. You love without the silent bargain of, "I need you to make me whole." This shift changes the very texture of your bonds. When you are not afraid of being alone, you are also not afraid to say no, to walk away, to protect your peace. You begin to understand that returning to yourself is not a retreat. It is a ritual, a compass you can follow through every season, every loss, every crisis. and you know without question that you will be there for yourself. That knowledge is rare. It is a form of power that few dare to claim. Solitude, when embraced consciously, becomes a kind of spiritual training. It tests you, shapes you, and strengthens you. Each time you survive a night of darkness alone, you emerge with a deeper strength you didn't know you had. Carl Jung wrote that the soul is fortified in retreat, that the mind sharpens in stillness, and that only in the vast emptiness within can a true and lasting direction be found. That direction does not arrive as a command from the world. It emerges quietly from within, from the part of you that only speaks when you have the patience to listen. And in that quiet, you realize a truth that feels like coming home. You were never truly alone. You were simply distracted, scattered, and distant from yourself. Now, you are finally returning. You begin to see that real companionship is not measured by how many people surround you, but by the quality of your own presence with yourself. Perhaps your whole life you have been trained to see solitude as failure, strangeness, or weakness. But now you know, being alone can be the bravest and most necessary act of your life. In a world that glorifies noise and demands constant visibility, you choose instead to stop, to breathe, to listen, not to the voices outside, but to the one you have silenced within. You listen to your body's fatigue, your mind's restlessness, your heart's unspoken grief. You hear the dreams you postponed, the truths you buried, the wounds you refused to touch. This listening, small yet profound, changes everything. When you can sit with yourself without fear, without anxiety, without the masks you've worn for survival, you reclaim the dignity and peace you once traded for approval. It is not about rejecting the world or isolating yourself in bitterness. It is about building an inner foundation so solid that your well-being no longer hangs on the fragile thread of another person's presence. Jung believed that all we need for a complete and meaningful life already exists within us. But to find it, we need silence, courage, and discipline. 3 things modern life tries to strip away. So the next time you feel the ache of loneliness, resist the impulse to run. Resist the urge to fill your hours with noise. Stay, breathe, watch what rises to the surface. Let yourself feel it without flinching. Because right there, in that discomfort, a door opens. A door to a version of yourself that does not depend on applause, distractions, or the unpredictable tides of conditional love. On the other side of that door is freedom. And once you cross it, you can no longer go back to living the old way. You no longer give yourself away to avoid emptiness. You no longer keep yourself endlessly busy just to avoid hearing your own thoughts. You stop running because you have learned that your own company is not a prison, but a home. Learning how not to be lonely while alone is an art. Like all art, it requires patience, practice, and devotion. It asks you to replace judgment with compassion, to speak to yourself as you would to someone you deeply love. There will be days when it feels easy, and days when you fall back into old patterns. But each time, you will return to yourself a little faster. Each time, the silence will feel less like emptiness and more like a welcome embrace. One day, without realizing it, you will notice that your favorite place in the world is simply being with yourself. Not because you have stopped loving others, but because you no longer lose yourself in them. You know that as long as you are fully present within, you will never be truly alone. The world will keep demanding your attention, urging you to be reachable, responsive, and endlessly available. But you will have learned something greater, the sacred power of stopping, of listening, of honoring the life within you. And if the noise of the world ever pulls you away again, remember, nothing out there can silence the voice you have awakened. You only need to return to it, always, without fear. And perhaps, in learning to stay with yourself, you will discover the most important truth of all. You were the home you were searching for. Thank you for staying until the end. If this message resonated with you, if it touched you at some deep point, subscribe so we can continue building this space where silence also has a voice. And tell me in the comments, what is the hardest part for you about being with yourself? And what are you learning in the process of inhabiting who you are? Your experience might help someone who still feels lost.